Is everyone in Boston a liberal? Are people in Boston stuck up and rude? And does Boston have the most diehard sports fans of all? We're going to look at what it's like to live in Boston, what the different neighborhoods are like, and even meet people who live in Boston. So grab a donkeys. We're going to unbox the city of Boston. Boston, one of America's finest cities. There's tons of stuff to do here. It's relatively safe, and it's expensive. But it's expensive in just about any other coastal city in this country. Come on now. Boston folks are tough and opinionated, but once you crack that outer shell, they're pretty cool underneath. Boston's not necessarily an unfriendly place, but don't expect anyone to say hello to you when they walk by. And no, everybody here doesn't talk with a Boston accent, although a lot of the construction workers in Southie do. So where are the good and bad areas in Boston? What parts of the city are good for you? Well, in order to know that, we should look at a map and see the different areas. Then we can look at each one by one. This is Boston. As you can tell, there's a lot of great areas and some really bad ones. Another couple themes we're going to see is that Boston's being gentrified fast, and it's really expensive to live in the Boston metro area, like double the national average. But that high price tag gets you some good quality, people. We're going to come back to the map in a few minutes. Let's look at downtown now and get to know Boston a little bit more. There's a lot of young people in Boston. The schools are above average in the city proper, but they get better the further from downtown you get. There's universities everywhere here. There's over 100 different colleges and universities in the Boston area, which is a lot. The crime's not too bad. If you measure the largest cities in the country, Boston doesn't even rank in the top 100 for bad crime. So that's good. Politics-wise, this is a very liberal city. It actually ranks as the 5th most liberal city in the whole country when you look at voting patterns in past administrations. I mean, more than 80% of this city voted Democrat in the last election. A quarter of the population here claims Irish ancestry, and that's by far the highest in the country. The Irish community in Boston and across the nation used to vote heavily Democrat, but as they've aged and grown more successful, they're swinging more Republican. Good for them. The job scene here is great, and there's a booming tech scene in Boston. And despite the fact that there's a bunch of smart local college grads all over, sometimes these tech companies can't find enough people to fill all these open positions. Citywide, only about 5% of Boston's out of work, putting it towards the bottom when it comes to the number of people out of work of all major U.S. cities. It's a young, tech-savvy city, and people take their careers very seriously, making Boston notoriously hard to find a long-term relationship. Everybody's just so busy to date. As you can see, the streets are really clean, and the parks are generally well kept. You wouldn't find a ton of homeless people here, because Boston ranks 40th in the country for homeless people per capita. Now, Boston has a dense, walkable downtown with really narrow, crooked, one-way roads. There's tons of things to do here. There's a lot of history here. I mean, this was a very important place for the American Revolution. You know, the Boston Tea Party and all.
Gonna show you how we feel. We're gonna dump this tea and turn this harbor into the biggest cup of tea in history.
Boston has tons of events. A lot of the colleges here host lectures where you can learn a lot. And of course, there's endless bars and restaurants. More than 20% of the population here are supposedly binge drinkers. And you could say 90% of Boston's a Dunkin' Donuts binge drinker. I mean, it seems like Boston has like 1/3 of the country's donkeys. Everybody here's sports obsessed. And they have some pretty darn good teams in town. Like, in the last 5 years, every team here but the Celtics has won a world championship. So if you like beer and sports, this is a fun place to be. Spring and fall are lovely, but kind of chilly. Summer's amazing. Winter's terrible, but it's only 3 or 4 months long. Come on now. Boston's the 21st biggest city with nearly 700,000 people, and the Boston metro area is the 10th biggest metro in the nation. The population here is growing, but not as fast as it once was, and a lot of the urban sprawl is happening on the city's west and south sides in Norfolk and Plymouth County. Here's a map that actually shows the population growth and loss for all of Massachusetts counties. Apparently, a lot of people are leaving Western Mass and the Cape. Now, of course, the traffic here is terrible, but the good news is the mass transit system has been ranked the best in the country by a somewhat reputable source. If you moved here, you'd be in good company if you were one of the 13% who commuted by train, rail, ferry, or bus. And of course, the cost. Boston is really expensive and ranks just behind Los Angeles for price per square foot. The average home here is $665,000, and the household income averages only about $72,000. Groceries and healthcare cost a lot here too. Now, where can you live? Well, that depends on how much money you have. For a regular life, there's some great areas over here in the western burbs, which are kind of blowing up with new people. Places like Hudson, Acton, Concord, Sudbury, Shrewsbury, out to Worcester, they're all going to be in the $450,000 to $550,000 range. Great places for families and kids, and it's really safe, and the schools are good. If you want to live along the water, it's going to be double that. But places like Manchester by the Sea or Marblehead, they're great. Up in Essex County are places like Andover and Boxford, and they're going to be in the $700,000 to $800,000 range for a house. But those are also great options. I know it's expensive here, but it's Massachusetts. What'd you expect? These places are all really good areas. Oh, and avoid Lynn and Brockton. Those areas suck. And when you come to Boston proper, there's all kinds of neighborhoods to consider. To really get to know Boston, you have to know the different areas, right? You want to know where to live and where not to live, and what kind of people are in each neighborhood. There's no one best neighborhood to live here. It all depends on your budget. And a lot of the housing stock is 2 to 3 family triple deckers, and they cost a lot, despite being a little bit run down in many areas. And of course, there's bad areas to live in Boston, places that have high crime and rundown areas, but they're quickly being gentrified and becoming home to younger people and wealthier families. That's a theme we're going to see as we go through all of these Boston neighborhoods. Gentrification, gentrification, gentrification. Here's a rundown of the different areas in Boston based on neighborhoods, each of which has its own culture and character. We'll begin across the river, over here in Somerville. Somerville used to be a bad area. It was known by locals as Slummerville. Today it's gentrified and there's lots of bars and restaurants. Plus, if you're into cheap vodka, they bottle rot gut brands such as Cossack and Rubinoff here. You probably wouldn't use these terrible liquor brands for cleaning products, much less to get drunk, but you might have to drink cheap booze if you lived here, considering the average home price is $836,000. What the hell? Next to that's Charlestown, which is far classier. A lot of suburban families have moved into Charlestown. It's more of a neighborhood. There's not a lot to do here, and it's very expensive and liberal leaning. Charlestown has a historic feel to it, if that's your thing. It's also super expensive. Want to live near and around a bunch of dorks? Have a lot of money? Then Cambridge would be a good place for you. Cambridge is filled with biochemistry and computer software types who will undoubtedly change the world. Because, Harvard and MIT are right here. And talk about liberals, this might be the most liberal part of the whole city. Homes here are like $950,000 on average. You can't afford it. Over here's Chelsea and Revere. You don't want to live there. They're both pretty run down and there's lots of drugs. You're only about 5 or 6 miles from downtown up here. But these places feel like you're a world away. Homes cost far less though, like $429,000. And that's super cheap for Boston. Across the harbor is East Boston, or Eastie. It's way cheaper to live here than most of the rest of the city. It's gentrifying here as well, but it's still sort of rough around the edges. Lots of people chilling on the stoop and lots of corner markets. There used to be a lot of Italians here, but now it's more South Americans. Fun fact, some of the Kennedys are from here. How about that? Over here is Allston Brighton. Now if you're into drunk, artsy-fartsy, hipster student types, you'd fit right in. There's a lot of younger professionals who rent here, and they hang out in gritty neighborhood bars and cafes and restaurants. They call it hip and trendy, but you can only call it that if you're hip and trendy, and you are not. Expect to find vomit in your yard on an occasional morning. There's also lots of Asians here. A couple miles away is Brookline, which has more of a suburb vibe and some mansions scattered throughout. It's way more of a family-friendly place than Allston Brighton is. It's just a quiet little place with little bookstores and cafes. Look at the price tag. 1.1 million smackers, pal. Right next door is Mission Hill. It's a small neighborhood. There's a lot of college students here who pack into the 5-bedroom rentals and throw parties. It's a great place for college kids who finally moved off campus, or for younger professionals who are too poor to live in nicer neighborhoods. It's kind of dead here during the summer. Over here by Fenway Park is Fenway Kenmore. There's lots of young people who live here in small, crappy, way overly expensive teeny apartments, and lots of drunk people wandering around, especially during baseball season. They're building this neighborhood up as well. There's a lot of new places here to eat and shop. There's also lots of new overpriced condos here too. A typical one is going to run you about $630,000. Back Bay used to be a swampy dirt pile. Like literally, this part of Boston was just dirt forever, but now it's booming. Being so new, it's much more modern than many other neighborhoods. There's a lot of fancy shopping and restaurants and bars here, and many new modern office buildings. It's sort of trendy, and much of it's just street after street of unaffordable mixed-use real estate. If you have a trust fund, you'd like it here, because, it's the most expensive place we've talked about so far. This is Beacon Hill, which butts up against the Boston Public Garden and Boston Common. Folks here are rich, pal. There's a lot of stately brick homes with gates at the end of the driveways and cobblestone streets. If you have a Volvo or a Saab and old money, you'd enjoy it here. It's very much more old-fashioned nice rather than gentrified nice. Celebrities and athletes and politicians live here. You can't afford it. A lot of people in Boston don't even know where West End is. It's on the West End. This used to be all the slums where all the Italian and Jewish immigrants lived. But, they had to tear all that out and put in new fancy homes. If you lived here, you'd have lots of foot traffic because of all the concerts and hockey and basketball games at TD Garden. There's also lots of sirens at night because Mass General's right here. Maybe that's why it's so cheap. Relatively speaking, of course. The North End is what you would call Little Italy. It's packed with lots of restaurants and, of course, Italians. There's a lot of tourists that hang out here, and there's a gross water harbor stench in the air. If you want a great slice within a minute walk, it's only $813,631 for a home.
Like, it's beautiful, It's like, as far as like a little Italy's go, it's really nice. It's not, you don't see any crime over there. A lot of young professionals now. It's, I wouldn't say trendy, but it's a lot of people like, oh, we can go live in essentially Little Italy. There's not really any crime. Pretty clean over there too, is what I would say. Like the streets are clean. It's not. Yeah, it's like they keep it nice. A lot of people moving there now.
Chinatown is Chinatown. Downtown is downtown. You could live here, but it's going to be way more than $1 million for a condo just like this. Then we come to South Boston, Southie. This is where you're going to find a lot of Irish people and the typical Boston accent. This used to be the biggest concentration of poor white people in the nation back in the day, because, all the poor Irish immigrants. Well, no longer, because Southie has a bunch of new condos and young professional yuppie types who drink too much. If you look hard enough, you'll still find some housing projects and some neat row homes along the waterfront. This is also where they host the biggest St. Paddy's Day parade in the country. It's pretty expensive.
It's definitely gentrified, but like you're not going to go into the South Boston projects. Like you have to avoid certain areas. But as far as what it used to be or what people used to look at it as, yes, it's gentrified.
Directly south of downtown is South End. This was a nice area, and then it was a dump, and now it's all gentrified and up and coming with new families moving in again. It's not all fancy though. On one block, you'll see moms pushing $600 strollers. And then just right across the street, there's drug addicts hanging out near Boston Medical Center. Just don't make eye contact. You'll be okay. Overall, though, the South End is one of the hottest, stylish neighborhoods in Boston these days. And the price is more than $1 million. Where South End and Roxbury meet, it's a place called Methadone Mile. It's on the corner of Mass Ave and Melnia Cass. They call it Mass and Cass. This part of town has stabbings and shootings and an open-air drug market, so you don't want to live down here. Boston higher-ups say they're trying to shut Methadone Mile down. Hopefully they have some luck. I mean, it's only one intersection. Shouldn't be too hard to stick some cops down there and make them stop, right?
I feel bad for drug users. I wish they could kick that habit.
Have you ever done drugs, Mappy?
Never.
Oh yeah? How about that one time when we were in Washington State and you ate that pot?
Oh, that was different.
Different, huh? Now we get into the really bad areas. Roxbury is terrible these days. It's definitely one of the worst neighborhoods in Boston. Danger-wise, it gets a score of 2, meaning only 1% of other neighborhoods in the whole nation is more violent. It's mostly a black community ever since white flight in the 60s and 70s. Crack and heroin are the main recreational choices for many residents. You don't want to live here, especially if you're going to pay $560,891. No way. Next door is West Roxbury, which is nicer. It's a lot of middle-class people who take the T into downtown every morning. Dorchester is the largest and most diverse neighborhood in Boston. It, too, is fairly dangerous and filled with drug users. There's lots of heroin, lots of minorities, lots of gay residents, lots of low-income families, and a lot of pride. Like, a lot of people here are proud to be from Dorchester. Mattapan is supposedly the worst part of Boston. It's really poor and fairly run down. It's actually quite dangerous. It has a nickname, Murder Pan, because of all the shootings and stabbings and armed robberies. There's triple-deckers all over the place here. Some are fixed up really nice, and some are falling over. I was just there, and here's what it looked like. I didn't find these areas overly dangerous during the day, but it's clear that at night, they can be really rough. Home prices in these parts of town are high. Many are older, multi-unit row homes in disrepair. A lot of the area along the main thoroughfare is sketchy and traversed by people who look like they should be at work, but probably don't have jobs. However, at first glance, it's not that bad in Mattapan. I mean, compared to other Northeast hoods. And then we have Jamaica Plain, or JP as the locals call it. It's really diverse here too, and it's one of the cheapest places you can live in Boston. It's a mix of young families, professionals, artists, and activist hipster types. There's lots of independently owned shops and restaurants here. This neighborhood also has lots of minorities, gay couples, and broke young people who rent. Boston's a great place to live. There's a lot of logical people here, and intelligence is highly valued. It's pretty, and the weather's not too bad. The public transportation's great, as are the hospitals and the quality of education. There's tons of nightlife, great bars, good seafood, and loads of culture. The people are loyal, and for the most part, friendly and outgoing. And it's really safe, at least in many neighborhoods. It's just that it's really expensive, so you have to keep that in mind. And that's how we're going to begin our song. Boston, it is not cheap. Boston 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 is not cheap. Liberals they are. 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 Libs. That's alright though. They're alright with me. Whatever. Yeah. So how do people feel about the gentrification happening downtown and really close to downtown? How do you feel about that?
I think it's cool. Like a lot of, so, you know, like I said, Acton, it's a suburban community. There's, you know, it's a well-to-do area. So a lot of my friends and their parents, and like after they sell their house out in the suburbs, and they're, you know, retiring or the kids moved off, they're going into, like, some of them live in Charlestown, South Boston, which I can't tell you how long it's been gentrifying, but I know, like, that, you know, especially my dad knows, like, 20, 30 years ago, they're like, they're like, why would you move in there? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That's where you don't want to move. And now, like, people are moving there because it's on the coast, it's a seaport district. You know, there's a beach in South Boston. Like, it was never maybe clean before, but it's like they're moving in there. It's like, well, we can be close to the city. We can, you know, well, rent's going up now because people are moving there, but we can be close to the city, not pay too much. You can, you know, be right in the city when you need to be. There's water there. So it's gentrification, you know, as that happens, more people come in. You know, the first whoever decided let's start gentrifying an area, you know, people want to move there, then more it starts happening more, because then more people are like, oh, well, it's a safer area now. It's like South Boston, like there's projects, like you don't go, you're not going to go there, but like it's other areas, like my friends, you know, go there all the time. They're like, it's nice. There's you have rooftop parties, like on top of a rooftop deck, you know, drink, you can look over the city. And that was never, like, Charlestown too, I've heard, maybe not to the degree that it's gentrifying in South Boston, but Charlestown too, it's like that would never be, it'd be the opposite of the place that you would go, you know, why go there? But now it's like it's a nice place to go. It's a nice place to, rent an apartment, buy an apartment,
Yeah, good. Yeah, I'm all for gentrification. I mean, people, I know that they displace people, and that's not a good thing. But you got to clean some of these places up. I mean,
Yeah.
if they're run down, you got to just fix them up, or they're just going to get worse. I mean, you can't.
Long overdue. Like, it should have happened years ago.
Yeah. So what advice would you give for people that are looking to move to Boston for like to start a family, or that has like a young family, or just people that just want to move and experience Boston and make that their permanent home? Is there any advice that you would give them?
My advice actually would be, if someone has the money, they can pick where they want to go, like the northwestern, like Acton, Concord, Lexington, far north of the city. You have places like Danvers, beautiful town. So you could, if you have the money to pick where you want to go, you could maybe pick one of those areas. But if you're just looking for a nice place to raise a family, maybe you're not a multimillionaire or whatever you have to be, you can, somewhere like Billerica. Billerica's not bad. It's a big town. You can get cheap, property's not too expensive. There's not a lot of the places. It might be like there's somewhere like Maynard. It's right next to Acton. It's a beautiful town. It's an old mill town. So maybe in the past it's like, oh, maybe why would you want to live there? But it's actually now the property value is going up everywhere. It's safe. There's a lot of small mill towns that maybe seem like, oh, this might be a decrepit place, but like there's no crime. It's cheaper to live there. You're also 10 minutes from a really nice town with millionaires. So it's like that's what people are doing. They're like, why would I go? I don't need to live in like the Beverly Hills of the area. I can go live in one of these nice old mill towns in a nice center, and they have a nice downtown area. It's a nice town. It's safe. There's not really any crime. I can pay less. The schools in the area are great, the education. So my kids can still go to a good school. So my advice would be, if I was looking to move here or move back here with a family, I would do that. I would go to do some research, but maybe go to a place where it's not like I don't have to pay, 10 grand, 20 grand a year in taxes or whatever the heck, and I can go to a nice town. It's safe. You don't need to waste a bunch of money. Your kid's still going to a good school. You have a nice downtown center. What I would say, Boston is the city itself, like on a map, the actual city of Boston. It's such a big region, like a metro region. So people look at the city of Boston, but places like, I would say, Woburn, Burlington, maybe Medford, Malden to a degree, like places just north of the city, because it sort of hooks down. So if you're just north of the city, you're still only you could be like 8 miles from downtown. You could be almost closer than sections of the city to downtown, and it's more suburbanized. There's better schools. So like, if someone wanted to live in Boston, I would say actually go up there, like Woburn, Burlington, what else do we got up there? Well, Lexington, that's, maybe Bedford, Mass. Like, as you sort of go north, you're still only 8, 10, 12 miles outside of the city, but you're in the suburbs, That's what I would say. If you wanted to move to Boston, just move, get better schools, you're just as close.
If I moved to Boston and I didn't give a crap about sports, would I be able to make friends?
I think so. But that depends on the rest of your personality, I suppose.
What if I was unintelligent and didn't drink and didn't care about sports? Could I make friends?
There's enough going on that you could find other things to bond with people over outside of either education, drinking and bar scene and sports. But it might be a challenge because it's a little hard, especially these days where people are our events are canceled and people are staying in. It might be an uphill fight, honestly.
I bet if I had a car, I'd have more friends.
That'd probably help.
My brother Cam Goulet also loves your channel. We all watch it. So shout out to him too. But my brother Liam, his name's Liam Goulet. He was in Afghanistan for a year or over a year. He just got back a month ago. He specifically said, when I told him I was going to do it for the channel, he was like, oh, dude, like I fell asleep watching his videos over there. Like he loves geography, loves we love history, things like that. So he loves your videos. And he specifically was like, dude, like you gotta tell him, like, you know, he was like, this is your chance. You gotta tell him I love the videos. I was over there watching them, so I just wanted to give him a shout out.
So Liam,
His name is Liam, Liam.
what's up, Liam? Hope you're doing. Is he still over in Afghanistan?
No, he's back now. He got back.
Oh, good. All right.
3 weeks ago.
All right.
Yeah,
Back to the real world.
People coming back from Bagram base over there, so he's
Okay.
happy to be back.
Is he? What's he gonna do now? And now that he's a civilian again.
He's right now. He's happy to be back. He's
I bet.
he made his money in the last year. He's relaxing for a little bit, decompressing, and then I think he's gonna move from there.
All right, Liam. Well, keep decompressing, man. You put in some hard work. We appreciate it. Special thanks to Lior Rozansky and Nune K, who are both Boston area realtors who let me use clips of their various Boston neighborhoods. If you move to Boston, look those two up. They can put you in a nice home. The link to their YouTube pages is in the description. Hey guys, if you learned something new about America or what it's like to live in America, great. You should think about subscribing and turning on your notifications. You can also click one of these videos or playlists for more. You can also now buy my songs on iTunes and other formats. Click the link in the description. Thanks for watching. And remember, while we all might have different views, we should all be nice to each other and try to make the U.S. a better place in a positive way.
This is Sage, Nick's manager. This has been a Corner House Entertainment production.
And are you looking to move and need advice? I do consulting. That's right. I'll sit down and talk about where the next perfect place for you and your family should be. I do it all the time. Together, let's find you a new home that's safe and checks all your boxes. You can get my email in the description to find out how I can help you find your perfect relocation.